One, good evening, everyone, and good morning to you there in the Philippines. Our topic this session is on the eighth commandment. And before I start, I just want to thank Brother Jess and Susan Maggio for the support that they've given me. I could not have done this at all without their help. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all the things that you've helped me with. The topic is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. First slide, please. Okay, it's actually really all about truth and honesty, simply speaking. The eighth commandment forbids all kinds of falsehoods and commands total truthfulness. And it forbids misrepresenting the truth in our relationship with others. And the eighth commandment does not merely tell us to speak the truth to others, but it also requires three things of us. And I will be talking and describing these three things for us as part of my presentation. Slide 2, please. The three things that this eighth commandment requires of us is this: we must know the truth, we must love the truth, and we must live the truth. So let's start with the first one, know the truth. Slide 3, please. What is truth? Well, to know the truth is to know that God is the source of all truth. His word is truth. His law is truth. And most importantly, God is truth. In John 6:14, Jesus proclaimed, I am the truth, the way, and the life. So, truth, would you believe truth is a person? Truth is a person. Truth is personally personified in Jesus Christ. So since God is truth, we, the members of his church, are called to live the truth. That's Catechism 2465. The truth actually is a moral prescription from God to us. Untruths are fundamental infidelities to God. And in this sense, they undermine the foundations of our covenant of God and with God. Now, let's look at the second requirement. Slide 4. The eighth commandment also requires us to love the truth. So how do you love the truth? Well, to love the truth is to embrace the truth as a reflection of our love for God. Truth aims at love. Truth serves love. And love aims at and supports truth. 1 Corinthians 13:6 tells us that love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. Truth is shaped by love. 2 Timothy 2:24-25 states that love shapes truth into words and ways that are patient and gentle. And in so doing, it sanctifies us, you as the person talking, and the people and the person that you are talking with. Catechism 2466 states that in Jesus Christ, God's truth was revealed to us because he came as the light of the world to bring truth to us, because cannot be separated from the other. So to love the truth is also to love God. Slide 5, please. The third requirement is to live the truth. To live the truth is to avoid misrepresenting the truth in our relations with others. That means that we do not lie about, betray, or slander our neighbor, but instead excuse him, speak well of him, and put the best construct in that relationship. Now, in a little while, I will present different ways in how to fulfill this third requirement. It gets a little bit involved, how to live the truth in our daily lives. But first, I want to talk about the two kinds of truth. Next slide, please. So there are two kinds of truth, material and spiritual truth. Material truth is truth that is discovered through scientific experiment and exploration and can be proven through observation. It is the search for truth and knowledge about our physical world. There are no absolute truths in science. There are only approximate truths. Whether a statement, a theory, or framework is true or not depends on quantitative factors and how closely you examine or measure the results. Truth in science is never final, and what is accepted as a fact today may be modified over time or even discarded. I am reminded of an article that I read where Pope John Paul II formally acknowledged that it wrongly condemned and arrested Galileo and forced him to recant his theory that the earth revolves around the sun. And he did that 350 years after the fact. So you see, material truth can change over time, sometimes even as long as 350 years. Spiritual truth, however, is truth that is revealed by God and revealed in part through the prophets and fully in Jesus through his word. Earlier, I mentioned that God is truth. So if God is truth and God is absolute, then spiritual truth, like material truth, is absolute. It is true today, tomorrow, yesterday, and forever. Next slide, please. If we want to have complete truth or to attain the fullness of truth, we need to use both faith and reason. Faith is the belief in the truth of something that does not require evidence and may not be provable by any empirical or rational means. Reason is the ability of the mind to arrive rationally to a logical conclusion. Both faith and reason form the ordinary human tools or equipment that is necessary for us to arrive at the fullest possible knowledge. For example, the scientist who studies the universe and calculates the distance of the Earth from the most remote stars attains only a limited knowledge if he confines himself to physical and mathematical calculations without asking questions about the origin of the universe. On the other hand, we use our faith to seek answers to questions about the origin of the universe. Faith is over and above reason and is not to be subject to criteria generally used by reasoning beings. Faith without reason leads to superstitions, and reason without faith to nihilism and rationalism. Faith comes after reason. Faith allows reason to grow. Faith enables one to understand further truths that could not be discovered through reason alone. So you need both faith and reason as sources of authority upon which the fullness of trust can rest. The other criteria to attain the fullness of truth has to do with humility and trust. Moral humility is knowing that no matter how confident we are or how self-assured we are about our moral compass, we're still vulnerable under stress and we lose our way. In other words, moral humility is recognizing our own limitations. Our human nature has limitations because of our concupiscence. Because of our concupiscence, we tend to sin. We tend to take the easy way out. We tell a white lie, we save face, or even yet ignore our limitations, like Pilate did, Pontius Pilate. If you remember the encounter between Pilate and Christ, Christ answered Pilate's question, stating, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born," Jesus said, "is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listened to me." So Pilate failed to answer his own question of what is truth. Instead, he turned his back to Jesus and he failed to listen and act on the truths that his heart was telling him, that Jesus was innocent of the charges against him in the face of the truth standing before him, because we said that Jesus is truth. Truth is a person. Why did he fail? Because he failed to accept the limitations and lacked trust in Jesus' words. Because why? Because of pride and arrogance. So whether one realizes it or not, humility and truthfulness are inextricably intertwined with each other, like a horse and carriage. They cannot be separated. Saint Teresa of Avila gave us the foundational meaning. She said, humility is truth. Becoming aware of and accepting the truth of who we are, our gifts and blessings, as well as our shortcomings and transgressions. Therefore, we must learn to be dependent on God. So the meeting between faith and reason, humility and trust are therefore the criteria for attaining the fullness of truth, and consequently for being truly free, since the truth will set you free, as stated in John 8:32. Now, earlier I mentioned that there were 3 requirements to obeying the 8th commandment. I covered the first 2, to know the truth and to love the truth. Next slide, please. I now want to cover the 3rd requirement, and that is how to live the truth. Well, without the truth, there can be no trust. And without trust, there can be no relationships with others. The Catechism tells us that men could not live with one another share a model for maximizing relationships based on trust. Next slide. It is called the Tory theory. I've used this theory for, I don't know, probably 2 decades or 3 decades. And I can tell you from experience that it is very effective. I've used it at work. You can use it with members of your family. You can use it with your co-workers. You can use it for just about everything that involves relationships with people. The Tory theory is based on Jack Gibbs' work on interpersonal relationship. And I want to tell you that you can spend a whole day learning and applying this concept. But Obviously, we can't do that tonight, but I will give you a taste of it just to whet your appetite. And so you just get a basic understanding of some effective measures in how to handle interpersonal relationships. I will say that there is an accompanying practical application to this, and that's for another time. But here goes. The goal of the Tory theory is trust. That is the utmost goal. And when you achieve trust, when you have a high level of trust, you're freed up to be yourself. You don't have to have any kinds of pretensions. You don't have to drop roles and positions and all of that. It's just unconditional trust. But you can't achieve trust unless you work on the O below it, openness. Openness has to be present. And this means openness with honesty in your thoughts, words, and deeds. When I was working with Brother Jess, I'm getting to know him as I've worked with him. I worked with him in at least 2 presentations already. I had to be open with him and tell him, I'm nervous. I've never done an apologetics class before. I don't know if I can do it. It's hard for me to work with somebody else's lesson plans. I've never done Zoom. I gave all kinds of reasons why I can't do it, or it's very difficult for me. And I told him that, and I was very honest with my feelings and the fact that and some of the aspects of the lesson plans, I found it difficult to understand. But nevertheless, I said yes. Okay, because I saw enough of him that I could trust him. So you have to work at openness in order to move up to trust. But you can never get there unless you put a lot of effort on R. R is called realization. And realization is present when both parties believe that in this relationship, each one has equal power to influence each other. So when Brother Jess and I talked, I told him how I felt. He told me what he felt. We were both open to each other's opinions, and we didn't disagree that much. But when we disagreed, it was okay. So the most important thing to realize about realization that in this relationship, you, despite your differences, you're going to make each other win. Okay. Why? For the simple reason that no one person has all the answers. I don't have it all. I don't have all the answers. Brother Jess doesn't have all the answers. But together, we're more likely to find the answers, or for this matter, the truth. Now, you cannot achieve the stage of realization unless interdependence is present. Interdependence is that condition or stage where you value the fact that in this relationship, we're going to make this relationship work. Why? Because we need each other. No man is an island. We need each other to make this relationship work. We are built for community. So one's journey to trust, if you work at this, starting from the I, move up to the R, move up to the O, and then you automatically, as a result, will get trust. If for some reason any one of this breaks down, you go right back to the bottom. And let me tell you, once you've broken trust and you try again, it takes twice as hard to get back up to trust. So why not do it all right the first time? It's hard to do, but it requires effort, and your efforts will be rewarded by a strong and a wonderful relationship. I wouldn't say close to agape a relationship, but very good and satisfying relationship. Now, so one's journey to trust is dependent on the strength of each level and the degree of effort spent on it. If a stage is compromised, you have to start again from the bottom and work up. Slide 10, please. It's important, though, to remember that regardless of what communication system you use in your relationships, charity or love is a duty. So let's briefly describe charity. Charity is just another word for love. Charity is present when the following elements are present in encounters. Next slide. If you have charity, these things are evident. Sincerity. It is a discreet use of truth or silence as necessary. You don't have to tell the whole truth or tell the truth to everyone. You're discreet about your use of truth or silence. Another characteristic is you are in communion with the person you're talking to or the group that you're talking to. When I say communion, in your dealings, you create unity instead of division. And you avoid injuring or making fun of the other. Revenge is not in the equation, or violence. In other words, you don't say he's a drug addict and he was in prison for 10 years. And did you see how he talks? You know, he has a funny list, things like that. Those kinds of words does not convey gentleness and patience. It does not convey love. Courtesy is another characteristic of charity. Courteous people know how to wait for the right time, using truth to edify without destroying the truth, gives courage and doesn't leave others without hope. And the last is absence of lies, even white lies. So if charity is present, these 4 bullet points are also present. Next slide, please. Now, Catechism 2489 states that charity and respect for the truth should dictate the response to every request for information or communication. In other words, charity or love is the underpinnings for all personal communications. The good and safety of others, respect for privacy and the common good are sufficient reasons for being silent about what ought not to be known or for making use of a discreet language. The duty to avoid scandal often commands strict discretion. No one is bound to reveal the truth to someone who does not have the right to know it. But we should not withhold truth from those who have the right to know it. Again, charity is the underpinning of truth. It's the foundation of truth. You know, I just added this on today because I just read it this week and I thought it was applicable to this presentation. I happened to read an article on Facebook, which was giving the results of a poll that asked approximately 4,000 American adults what qualities did they want in their desired political leaders. 75% of people responded that they wanted leaders who were honest, courageous, and hardworking, and who act in the best interests of the nation. Furthermore, the response included the need to model kindness and understanding in order to restore peace and unity. The people wanted their freedoms protected through the application of truth and principles founded in the Constitution versus changing the system to satisfy personal references or ideological ideals. People were tired of all the nastiness that we're seeing in the current culture of our world today. Furthermore, Catechism 2510 addresses the golden rule. The golden rule helps one discern in concrete situations whether or not it would be appropriate to reveal the truth to someone asks for it. The golden rule states, in everything you do, Do to others what you would have them do to you. This rule of conduct is a summary of the Christian's duty to his neighbor and states a fundamental ethical principle. Now, as promised, in the next few minutes, I would like to cover other ways that we can live truth. Slide 13, next slide, please. Other ways we can live truth is through appropriate handling of privileged communication. Catechism 2490 has to do with the secret of the sacrament of reconciliation. That secret is sacred. It cannot be violated under any pretext. It is a crime for a confessor in any way to betray a penitent by word or in any other manner or for any other reason. A priest in the confessional knows his penitent's sin. Out of the confessional, he knows nothing about them. When called to testify as a witness in court or
Can't hear you.
professional secrets, such as between a doctor and a patient, attorney-client, or political office holders, or in the military. Catechism 2491 tells us that confidential information given under the seal of secrecy must be kept and not to be divulged without a great and proportionate reason. Next slide, please. If you work under civil authorities or within the civil authority jurisdiction, you must defend and safeguard a true and just freedom of information for the common good. In other words, no fake news to manipulate the truth to further one's agenda or their truth. There's a lot of that going now in our age of relativism. Next slide. Interference by the media in private lives of persons engaged in political or public activity is to be condemned to the extent that it infringes upon their privacy and freedom. We have the right to our own privacy and freedom. Next slide, please. Witnessing to the truth. This means that it is the duty of Christians to take part in the life of the church and to act as witnesses of the gospel and all of the obligations that flow from it. So this means that this witness is a transmission of the faith in morals and deeds. We have to act out our faith. And this is called being an incarnational witness. We are to be engaged with people and living a life of Christ-likeness. When I read this, I thought of a fellow parishioner of mine. Her name is Nancy, and she's very active in Planned Parenthood activities. So she will march with fellow Catholics in front of Planned Parenthood buildings and carry placards and everything. So that would be an example of being an incarnational witness and living Christ-likeness in what it is that we do. We are reminded of this also. A second example is we are reminded of this also at the end of every Mass, when the priest exhorts the congregation and the priest says, "Go forth, the Mass is ended. Go and announce the gospel of the Lord. Go in peace and glorify the Lord by your life." And the emphasis here is live the good news rather than preach the good news. Next slide, please. I would like now to discuss the subject of offenses against the truth. There's 8 of them, and I will address them one by one. These offenses against the truth are sometimes called the sins of the tongue. And they are motivated by envy, by hatred, by arrogance, by vindictiveness and guilt feelings, to name a few. Proverb 19:9 tells us that a lying tongue shall not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish. The first one is lying. Next slide, please. Lying has to do with speaking and acting against the truth in order to lead someone into error. To lie is a failure in justice and charity. I will talk a little bit more about the gravity of a lie towards the end of my presentation. Next slide. Second offense is false witness and perjury. When it is made publicly, you make a statement contrary to the truth. And when it's said in court, it becomes false witness. When under oath, it is perjury. Next slide. Rash judgment. This is convicting someone of a moral fault without solid facts. It defames and leads the mind to an unfavorable judgment. For example, you see a girlfriend's husband with another female in a restaurant, and you assume that he's having an affair behind your friend's back, and you plan to tell her. I remember an assertion class I took many years ago at UCI, where the instructor said that people act on their perceptions, and whether or not those perceptions are based on reality determines the quality of the outcome. So be careful when making a rash judgment. A rash judgment, when you judge a person without having the facts, it does not define who they are. It defines who you are. Next slide, please. Detraction means calumny, and calumny is making remarks contrary to the truth. Next slide, please. And it harms the reputation of others and gives occasions for false judgments concerning them. So when you have detraction and calumny together, you really destroy the reputation and honor of your neighbor. Honor is the social witness given to human dignity, and everyone has the natural right to the honor of his name, reputation, and to respect. So when you practice detraction or calumny, it offends against the virtues of justice and charity. Next slide, please. Encouraging, number 6, offense. Encouraging and confirming another in malicious acts and perverse conduct. It states that every word or attitude is forbidden which by flattery, adulation, or complaisance encourage or confirms another in malicious acts and perverse conduct. I'll give you an example. Somebody comes to you and says, I just came from 8 o'clock mass and I heard Susie lecture. She was horrible and tripped over her words. She shouldn't be a lector, you know? So you answer and say, you're right. I can't stand her either. And she mumbles her words and I really can't understand it. What's the use of proclaiming the word if you can't understand it? So together, if you join and you by flattery, adulation, and agree with what that person's saying, you become guilty of Catechism 2480. I find this true, and this is a real case, by the way, in my parish. Next slide, number 7 offense. Boasting or bragging. It's an offense against the truth and can lead to condescension, one-upmanship, or lie about an accomplishment to inflate the ego. So is irony, aimed at disparaging someone by malicious caricaturing some aspect of his behavior. For example, saying to a waiter who dropped his tray, "Good job," that's irony. Or saying to a rude customer, "Have a good day." You're being sarcastic there. Next slide. I think we can identify with this next slide very well. There are many, many kinds of gossips. There are angry gossip, envious gossips, entertaining and amusing gossip, honest and insecure gossips. Gossips have one thing in common. It's talk about others and usually not complimentary. It can lead a person and others to sin if we're not careful. It infects and it corrupts. It undermines charity and mistrust in relationships and can render our relationship with God void. St. James says, "For anyone who gossips, their attempts at religion are worth nothing." My bias, personally, is that at best, gossip is merely a substitute for real connection with another, real processing of issues, or real action or reparations. So rather than addressing the persons themselves and their upsetting behavior, we are tempted to tell everyone except the one person who would actually benefit from the conversation. At its worst, gossiping is poison that make life unbearable. That is why gossip is so bad. There's an old story, I'm sure you're probably familiar about it, likening gossip to casting feathers in the air and seeing how hard it is to gather them all back. Imagine the snowstorm of feathers we've created with our injudicious work. But have no fear. Next slide. How do we prevent gossips? Well, there are 3 suggestions here. If you cannot speak well of someone, don't speak of the person at all. So what can you do? You either stay silent, you remove yourself from the conversation, or you distract. "Oh, look at that beautiful mockingbird," and then go on to the next topic. Whatever you can do, just don't fall into the trap of adding injury to the harm. Second one is think well of others. If you say, for the example, like the example I used, "Oh, she's a terrible lecturer." "Oh, you know what? She bakes the best banana bread." Whatever you do, if you hear a derogatory comment, think the opposite way. Give a complimentary remark. Refrain from making negative judgments unless the facts are well-founded. And thirdly, give someone the benefit of the doubt, for we can never fully know what is in someone's heart. Okay. The last end of my presentation is on the next slide, please. The duty of reparations. Okay. Every offense committed against justice and truth entails the duty of reparation. So the gravity of the lie or the injury that you have done determines what kind of reparation you must do. But must do, you should. In other words, I am liable to you to pay for damages for harm that you have suffered if it was caused either by some willful act of mine aimed at causing some harm, or by my failure on my part to take what could be objectively regarded as reasonable care in the circumstances of the case. When I was working on this, I thought that the importance of reparation is not emphasized enough. And so I would like to discuss this final section of my presentation sentence by sentence, because I think for all practical purposes, this is where the rubber meets the road. First sentence: every offense committed against justice or truth entails the duty of reparation, even if the author has been forgiven. So what this means is that there is an important place for the experience of guilt when we have done wrong. Just like in Alcoholics Anonymous, before they start to speak, they say, "I am an alcoholic." They admit their guilt or the wrong that they have done. So you have to admit the wrong that you did. The Bible tells us that we need to acknowledge that we have sinned. We are to accept that we have done wrong. Reparations is not atonement. Atonement can only be achieved through Christ himself. Reparation is a making of amends for our wrong one has done by offering expiation or giving satisfaction for a wrong or injury. You can't even begin to do that unless you have your reconciled that you've done wrong. The second sentence says, when it is impossible publicly to make a reparation for a wrong, it must be made secretly. An interpretation of secretly, besides the obvious, is to remember, and to repent for the wrongs of the past. In other words, you say, I remember what I did. I'm never going to do that again. So you have to accompany it with the commitment to avoid repeating of the wrong. For example, I'm sorry to use this example, but it's the only one that I could think of at the time. When
Can't hear you.
So they kept it secret. They kept it secret because they did not want to harm not only the person accused of it, or to make public the names of the people that were involved in the case. So that would be an example of keeping it secret. Now, the third sentence, if someone who has suffered harm cannot be directly compensated, he must be given moral satisfaction in the name of charity. Now, again, what the royal family did in this case, if you cannot compensate them financially, you must compensate them morally. So this is what they did. The royal family revised existing policies and procedures related to the bullying behavior so that that doesn't happen again. Another example I read just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, in Canada, a long time ago, if an indigent married a white person, for example, they would take the children of that union away from the couple and give it to a white middle-class family, which because they thought less of the indigent people. And they did that for, I don't know how many decades or so. And after a while, they realized, and if you remember reading it about a week or two again in newspaper, I read it in our newspaper, that Pope Francis apologized. He made an apology saying that it was wrong for us to do it. They did finance, both Canada, the government of Canada, and Pope Francis gave financial compensation, but they did more than that. The Pope Francis gave a public apology for its part in that injustice. So that's an example of if you cannot satisfy, compensate financially, you have to do it morally. And the last sentence is, this duty of reparation also concerns offenses against another's reputation. And so this reparation, moral and sometimes material, must be evaluated in terms of the extent of the damage. So it obliges in conscience. So you have to take a look at the gravity of the wrong that was done. And you have to think about it in conscience. And when God created us, he equipped us all with a tendency to know truth, to know the difference between right and wrong. This is your conscience. So you need to ask yourself, what is my conscience telling me the truthful reparation should be? What will my amends look like or sound like? The Catechism tells us that the faithful must pay careful attention to the sacred and certain teachings of the church to arrive at the answers to these questions. I must say this, reparations is hard work. If I have learned anything from doing this presentation, it is to be truthful and honest as a way of life, so I don't have to retrieve all those flying feathers that I have distributed through my lies and my dishonesty. Ephesians 4:29 tells us, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, that it may give grace to those who hear. I leave you now and end this presentation with an acronym for your reflection and use when communicating with others. Next slide, please. Think before you speak. T, ask yourself, is it true? H, weigh whether or not what we want to say is helpful. I, ensure that what you are to say is inspiring. N, determine if what you are about to say is necessary. And K, make sure the words that you use are kind. Next slide, please. The end.